You have been on the forefront of this in North Carolina for quite some time. And not to make light of a scenario like COVID at any way, shape, or form, any stretch of the imagination, but it's got to be almost exciting to the push that it has enabled for electronic notarization. All right, today's real talk. Justin Ckezepis here alongside Mr. Ozie Stallworth, the director of e-Notary and notary enforcement. Did I get that correct, sir?
Yes, Justin, you absolutely did. And thank you so very much for having me on today on behalf of Elaine Marshall, the Honorable Secretary of State. We're very honored and pleased to be able to talk with you about our notary and electronic notary program.
Absolutely. Now, so as e-Notary director plus notary enforcement officer or director of notary enforcement, excuse me, I would imagine that you probably have some friends and then some people who also fear you. Is that an accurate assessment, or am I off basis there?
Well, the title would kind of imply that there's a little bit of a stick attached to the job responsibilities. It certainly is the part of my responsibilities to enforce the notary law, but we couple that and lead with education and training. We are also responsible for providing the curriculum for the notary and e-notary courses, training the certified notary instructors who in turn are able to provide an excellent level of education to the citizens of North Carolina. And so we rely on them to carry forth the message and provide the training and try to encourage the notaries to, pay really close attention in class and to follow the laws. And then that way we won't have to kind of come on the back end with any disciplinary actions.
Yeah, commission expirations and verifying identity are probably pretty important at the top of the list there. I'm gonna guess, but what we really want to focus on today is this concept of e-notary. So, Mr. Stallworth, I'm a real estate attorney as well. My practice is purely in transactional real estate. I'm going to be honest with you. I love the idea. I love the concept, and I want to do what I can to help promote it in the right ways. And based on the short conversation we've had together, I think you feel the same way. I think everyone in the public knows you feel the same way based on your past speakings and your news outlets that you've done and things like that. So what I want to start with is the basic. Give me the general basic when we talk about notary versus e-notary. What's our difference?
Well, first let me share with you what the similarity is. And this is really important for the listening public to understand. The role of a notary is vital to our economic infrastructure in the state of North Carolina and beyond. The primary purpose of the notary is to protect the public from fraud and forgery. And so whether or not you're dealing with traditional notarization or an electronic notarization, that's the core principle. We need to make sure that the person who is signing this document, who's executing this document, is who they claim to be, such that the folks who are going to rely on the document, whether or not it ends up in a public record or a part of a business transaction, will have the trust and confidence in that transaction. So that's an important similarity that folks need to really be aware of. Now, in terms of the differences, primarily the difference is that you're just utilizing different tools. When we developed our electronic notary program in about 2005, the first thing that we did was we looked at our notary program and we decided that it wasn't broken. And so there was no need to try to recreate something that was vogue or new or just so different. So what we did was we mirrored our electronic notary program to our notary program in every area that we possibly could. Now, there were a couple of areas where we needed to make some changes because you don't have a handheld notary seal. Now it's a notary seal that's in an electronic form and you're clicking an icon potentially to apply it. But for the most part, through the administration, in terms of requiring a course of study and an exam, taking the oath of office at the Register of Deeds office at the conclusion of the process. all of that is the same from the notary to the electronic notary. So the primary difference is going to be the tools. Instead of a piece of paper, you're operating on a computer screen. Instead of an ink pen, you're writing with a stylus. Instead of, again, the handheld notary ink stamp, you're clicking an icon to affix it. And so you eliminate paper and everything is in the electronic arena. So that's the primary difference, but the overall purpose is very much still the same.
See, you say the requirements are pretty much the same, but I've got a beef to pick because as an attorney, I didn't have to attend the 8-hour course for my regular notary, but then for my e-Notary, I had to attend the 4-hour course. So I'll just throw that out there. Someone who was really good at skipping class, I wasn't able to do that on this. I'm just throwing that out there if we're talking about similarities. So.
Well, Justin, I've got to say, how much we certainly appreciate and value our legal community, and for many years, as you just pointed out, to become a notary, the only thing that an attorney needs to do is submit an application and pay the registration fee. But very frankly, one of the things that we have found over the years, and this is true because of a couple things. Number one, we have a very robust notary statute in the state of North Carolina, probably among the most robust notary statutes in the country. And as you know, they don't teach the notary law in in law school. And so the attorneys who have had an opportunity to go through our notary public courses, have all had a very favorable response. In fact, so much so that about 10 years ago, we began to offer a free CLE courses for attorneys so that they would be able to make sure that they were abreast of all of the various aspects of the notary law. And so when it was time to develop our electronic notary course, because it was so new and because of the technological requirements involved, and because it was potentially something that would be changing, the attorneys were not exempt from taking the electronic notary course. So yeah, you got me on that one.
I'm not mad though, because it's good to know what everyday people, right? And because I don't want to put attorneys on some type of pedestal. Trust me, we don't deserve to be put on any type of pedestal. So it's good that we were required to do it. I agree with you, because also having the opportunity to ask questions of the people that know the regulations, right? Because your instructor is being certified to teach the course, that requires a level of competency that even as an attorney, I don't automatically have. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I appreciate it, actually. So thank you for that. So let's talk about the progression of e-Notary, because you have been on the forefront of this in North Carolina for quite some time. And not to make light of a scenario like COVID at any way, shape, or form, any stretch of the imagination, but it's got to be almost exciting to the push that it has enabled for electronic notarization. So walk me through the progression of e-Notary. What was it in your mind that first started? What gave you the bug to say, man, we need e-Notary? What was that moment in your life?
Well, going back to 2005, and that was when I started with the Secretary of State, Secretary Elaine Marshall. She had a vision of streamlined government services where we had been building an electronic infrastructure that would support, way back then, electronic mortgage closing. And back in the early 2000s, that was all the buzz. And so with her foresight, she set out on a plan to make sure that we had electronic signatures, electronic notarization, and electronic recording, all as a part of a toolbox so that we could get to the place where we essentially are today. Now, it seems really odd that we're talking about way back in 2005, and here we are in 2021. Well, there's a few things that happened along the way. You'll probably recall back in, again, the early 2000s, 2007, 8, 9, it was a pretty nasty recession that we were in. The housing market was, in turmoil. We had the boom, the bubble, and then the burst.
Yeah.
And so at that point in time, all discussion and talk relative to electronic mortgage closing just went out the window. And it was radio silence straight through until 2016. And in 2016, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, CFPB, they did a pilot program on electronic mortgage closings. And at the conclusion of that, they determined that it was something that was in the best interest for consumers. Now, what happened in the intervening years, although again, all the momentum had kind of dried up, because we had already passed our laws relative to electronic signatures, electronic notarization, and electronic recording, we continue to educate the communities here in North Carolina about these tools, and they started to be integrated across the state. We started out with 4 or 5 counties e-recording. Now we have 90 counties that are e-recording. And more business entities have migrated to the use of electronic signatures. And that was one of the things that I used to say and got a lot of laughs, because very rarely do you have government entity outpacing the private sector in terms of technology, right? And I'm out here beating the drum saying, hey, electronic signatures, you got to use these things, right? And from a government entity, but we were kind of ahead of the curve. In fact, we were one of the first states, if not the first state, to acquire the use of an electronic signature solution provider to be utilized in every government entity, every government operation, as long as you want it to do so. And so it was Secretary Marshall's vision from many years ago that kind of propelled us to move in this direction. And the impetus for it way back then was electronic mortgage closings.
Question for you, and you can be honest or not be honest, it's up to you. Did anybody ever hang up on you when you called with the idea to them about e-signatures and e-notary? Did anybody hang up on you?
Well, I can fortunately say that, I've had a really good run, and although everybody wasn't always on the same page and on board, North Carolina has been very kind, and we've got great folks here who that Southern hospitality always seems to ring true. So I've avoided some of those.
That's it. You mentioned that you guys were the first to have a provider, like an option internally within to have electronic signatures. Was that a you guys as the Secretary of State hired a company to create your own internal, or was it a third-party platform?
No, that was a reference to a state initiative out of the Office of OSC, and it is a program that was for again, every government entity, from the smallest municipality to the governor's office, who could have signed on to DocuSign. DocuSign was the company that won that initial contract. And so that was something that I worked on as a part of the Secretary of State's office, but it was not our specific directive. We lent our expertise to that effort. And so as a state, we emerged as like, I believe, the first state to have that capability across all government agencies.
I get it. So my apologies. So you meant like from a program, pushing the concept out throughout the government, and then a third party came in and bid on the concept.
Yes, absolutely.
And you bring up DocuSign because, and I use DocuSign, full disclosure, within my firm, and it's not like a plug for DocuSign. There's a lot of platforms out there and whatnot.
Right.
I just previous to being an attorney, I still am a licensed real estate broker. So they just have some aspects as a broker that I liked, so I brought it into the firm practice as well. And we utilize it every day, multiple times a day. Electronic data and all that other kind of stuff is pretty wild, but DocuSign is what we use. And so I'm also an e-notary. And so I have my e-notary through DocuSign as well, which it does have that component. But the technology piece, right, it is what it will come down to where are we at with the requirements of the actual internal technical aspects, right, of an e-notary stamp? Are you familiar with that enough to kind of educate me on, okay, what's the requirement? Like, you've got to have multi-factor authentication login, or you've got to have whatever they say, 246 encryption, that I don't know the terms for, but are you familiar with those concepts too?
Well, let me share this with you. A couple things. We are in a new day and age, and we are at the Secretary of State's office in the process of reevaluating all of the internal requirements and structures relative to cybersecurity. And that is inclusive of all of the solutions that we are required to be able to approve. Now, where we currently stand in terms of the laws in our regulatory practices, everything's governed by statute. And so we have the electronic notarization law and the administrative code related to that. And then we rely also on the Uniform Electronic Transactions Law. And so those are and the Electronic Commerce and Government Act. And so those are the three acts along with their rules that guide the approval process for electronic notary solutions specifically right now. And so what the requirements essentially are for any electronic notary solution provider to meet those specific guidelines within there. In terms of security, what we did with electronic notarization is we determined that we would not specify any particular type of technology, but to have performance-based standards such that we would ensure the integrity of the actual document. In other words, once the notary has affixed his or her signature or seal on that document, the solutions have to then ensure that that document is tamper sealed or becomes tamper evident, such that if any changes are made to the document at all, one pixel is changed, there's a notification on that document that says document has been altered or changed. And not only does that appear on the face of the document as you're looking at it on the computer screen, but if you were to print that out, it would also need to print out on the paper version. And so we incorporated that level of technology as a performance-based standard to ensure the integrity of the document, so that we would know that those documents could be relied on and trusted. And so all of those requirements are kind of baked into the existing statutory framework.
So the integrity of the document, we're talking about fraud, right? Because that is what the concern is. I would imagine a majority, there's probably multiple concerns, but the main concern, I'm going to guess, is fraud. Because if I'm thinking about it from, let's say, a real estate transaction perspective, and let's say I'm a lender, let's say something happens and I win the lottery, which I'd share with you, by the way, just because you're
awesome.
But beyond that, if I start lending to people and I want them to be able to utilize electronic signatures and electronic notaries, let's say on the deed of trust that gets recorded with the Register of Deeds, my concern becomes, is that enforceable to the point that I still have my lien secured against the property if I have to foreclose? To your knowledge, is there a security instrument that has been foreclosed on in the state of North Carolina that contained an electronic notary stamp?
When we made the move to, and when I say we, I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly, even outside of North Carolina, just within the industry, the concern was the enforceability of these documents. And so there have been any number of cases. The first one, I think, was in New York, and then some in Florida, where the courts have ruled that these notes, these electronic transactions were enforceable, that they could be foreclosed on based on the audit trail that was provided and all of the security mechanisms that were in place relative to the transaction. And so Prior to those cases, there was obviously a concern because, we were in new territory. But once those cases started to roll in and they were um, um, decided in the fashion that they have consistently been decided, and that is in favor of relying on and accepting the transactions as enforceable, then that kind of alleviated the concern throughout the industry as to whether or not that was going to be something that would prevent folks from relying on these transactions. So that would be the answer in general. I am not sure whether or not we have had a specific case in North Carolina, but the precedent has been set nationally over and over again, such that it does not seem to be a point of contention anymore.
And I'm going to guess too that it hasn't happened because people in North Carolina pay their bills, right? We'll just assume that they don't have to worry about being forced for now. But I guess if we could take another step back from the practical application, okay, let's talk about then one of the other big topics that I think is going to progress: power of attorneys. Because if you want to utilize a power of attorney in order to execute a document on someone else's behalf, and utilizing an electronic notary on the power of attorney to then be recorded, right? So now we're talking multiple layers, right? Because you not only have the power of attorney itself, but then you've got a secondary document like a deed of trust that gets recorded by another third party who relied upon that electronic signature, right? An electronic notary of a separate document. I know I'm getting a little bit deep into the weeds on it, but I guess the progression of it and the possibility, right? And that layer of fraud, anything from the power of attorney side, maybe that you could share with us beyond. I don't want to just, this is a real estate show, but there is multiple levels to it, I guess is my point.
Right. And what I'll say is that I am not aware of any concerns or things that would be limiting in that regard. However, I'm going to go ahead and share with you and the audience again right now that we're kind of creeping over into areas that are outside of my expertise in terms of legalities related to powers of attorney and things of that nature. So I certainly don't want to say anything to mislead anybody, but I am not aware of any limitations that there would be at this point in time in terms of notarizing a document like that with an electronic notarization. But again, I would defer to someone like yourself to be able to
you don't want making this stuff up, I promise. I'll make it all. Yeah. Come on down, right? No, I'm a big fan of it, like I said, but I'm willing to ask the questions that people want to talk about, right? Like, if we're going to move this forward, let's have the conversation. And you're being with me and answering the question, right? Which I appreciate. Thank you for not dodging me on it and being willing to be humble and say, hey, to your knowledge, you're not aware of it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because now, I don't think I always think of it when I'm thinking through a transaction, someone asks me something random. Do I want to be the first case law, right, in the textbook for the future law students? That's the way my mind usually works. Most of the time it's a no. There's a couple of things I keep trying to egg on to become that first one because I believe in it. I don't know if this is one of those yet. That's not what I'm saying. But generally speaking, I get it and I appreciate it. But I think that leads us to where we've been the past year and where we're at now. Again, COVID being a very serious thing. We get the governor's executive order, and then we move into some emergency legislation, and poof, we've got a remote notarization legislation on the books, and it has since sunsetted, right? The expired. Is that correct?
Well, actually, it is called the emergency video notarization, right? And it expired a couple of times, but it has been extended a couple of times. So the current expiration date is set for December 31st of 2021.
Okay.
So yes, and this emergency video notarization law, what it did is it temporarily allows notaries to perform notarial acts remotely. And this is true for both traditional notaries as well as for electronic notaries.
So wait a second. So I
So
didn't have to actually go to the class, but now I'm being told I shouldn't have gone to the 4-hour class that I had to sit through, like we talked about in the beginning.
no, not at all, not at all. To
All right.
become an electronic notary, that course is still required. But the emergency video notarization, we kind of see it as an umbrella statute that allowed for the various types of notarial acts that are authorized in North Carolina to be performed remotely, whether or not that was traditional, paper and ink, or to use your electronic notary solution to perform a remote notarization.
The practical side of it. Can we get into that a little bit?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and again, I applaud the effort of people being able to come together to pass legislation. That should be a sport. I'm going to be honest with that. That concept in and of itself should be a sport. So I was excited to hear that the option was out there, and I utilized the option. So my practical experience of utilizing it in a real estate transaction, I was not able to use it, full disclosure, on the buyer side of a transaction because the legislation required me to add additional information to the notary acknowledgement that most of the time a institutional lender would not allow me to add. So I'll preface it that way. That was the stop gap I found on the buyer side of a transaction. Now, a seller side of the transaction, no offense to sellers, but the Dodd-Frank Act really doesn't care about sellers. So as far as it goes with TRID and the whole federal legislation, there's very few rules pertaining to the seller side. So I can modify up the seller side documents without a lender getting upset at me. And I utilize it on the seller side for deeds, lien waivers, marital status affidavits, non-foreign status affidavits for IRS code, authorization to wire proceeds, right? Because of the security frauds and wire fraud that's out there, we utilize and require electronic signatures or electronic notaries on our authorization to wire proceeds for sellers to protect the money. And it was an interesting experience. So my first one, can I tell you about my first one? It was
Absolutely.
love
to hear it.
It's kind of similar to how I'm doing right now. I'm bumbling on everything, but that's okay. So I get on the camera with the people, and it's one of those where you start off in an awkward sense because my camera was pointing straight down at my desk, and I didn't realize it for a couple of minutes. So before I even got to say hey to the people, they're just staring at a piece of paper on my desk. So that was a little awkward for a moment there. So finally, I got the camera adjusted so at least they could see my face for a moment. So that awkwardness was always fun to start the conversation that way. But then utilizing the actual process, someone shows me their ID, right? Which is always funny because, you got to put it in front of the camera. It's a little blurry. And then, wait a second, can you move it back? Can you move it forward? Right? So that's a fun process. And then we get into the signing of the document. Now, all jokes aside, this is where it got complicated for people. All right, what I need you to do, Ozie, now that you have shown me that document that you just signed, I need you to scan that document to me right now, because when I get that back after you go and go ahead and run by USPS or FedEx or UPS, so you can overnight that to me. By the way, I need that tomorrow, and I need the electronic version of that today. So when I get that one tomorrow, I can compare the two signatures. Right, that was the complicated part, was the verification requirement. But I get it. It was the fraud prevention piece, and you have to have something there if we're not talking about an electronic platform that can do that for you. So I understand it. But do you see what I'm saying when I talk about the practicalness of it, to where in a COVID world, their purpose was to stay inside the home, but now all of a sudden they've got to utilize more technology, which, hey, that's the cost of doing business. I'll put it that way. But by the way, you've got to also leave your house, and I need that document back right away. So they're almost leaving their house anyway. You get what I'm saying there, as far as that kind of difference of, hey, you can stay home, but then you got to leave and you got to go talk to people. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. And one of the things that I'll share with you is that in the environment that we were in, trying to make sure that we had an approach that would have been able to be utilized by as broad a number of people in as broad as circumstances as you can possibly imagine, covering the entire state. We have to start there. And so where we ended up, I thought, was a pretty nifty approach, because it had practical applicability to it
Absolutely.
for everybody. Now, in some instances, was it cumbersome? But absolutely. But what you're comparing that cumbersomeness to is the inability to have a document executed because of the COVID concerns and that type of thing. So, you're always going to have some challenges, right? But the system did allow, and currently still does allow, because it, again, won't expire until December 31st of 2021, someone to be in their home, to interact with a notary via a video conference tool like we're using currently, sign that document, and then put it in an envelope, stick it in their mailbox. No contact. The law allows for someone to take a picture of that document that was signed and email it, or scan it and email it, put it in the Dropbox. Just deliver it initially on that day by some electronic means. Now, some people have better capability to do that than others, right? And if you're challenged, if you don't have a fax machine, if you're not proficient at scanning and emailing, well, yeah, that's going to be a little bit tough for you. But there's still a possibility that you can get it done. Call your granddaughter over to kind of help you walk through that. Cumbersome, yes, but possible, absolutely yes. And we mitigated the overriding concerns of me having to interact with somebody in a face-to-face situation, and at the height of the COVID pandemic and such. So we were pretty pleased with the results of it and how widespread the usage was. Now, it wasn't for everyone, and again, depending on what your business operation was and how many headaches this process might cause versus well, let's set up a drive-through and and rig something up here so that we can pass documents back and forth and make sure that everybody is comfortable. So what it was about options, and to make sure that North Carolinians had the options available such that important transactions could continue to be executed.
And it's easy for me to poke fun, right, when I'm not the one in the legislative and the meetings back. I can only imagine. I have no doubt, and I don't even know, right? I bet you were called in multiple times to multiple meetings dealing with that, and I could only imagine what that was like explaining to even some of our legislators. No, when we mean electronic, we mean you don't actually need a pen, or when we mean remote, you still need a pen, and going through that, the differences and the nuances and all that kind of concept. So I know I poke fun a little bit, but I do applaud the effort, because I appreciate the fact that there was even a solution. There's plenty of states out there that didn't even want to come up with a solution in the moment. Nope, stay inside, don't do anything, no business to be conducted, where at least North Carolina was willing to find, like you said, a solution, an option for people to continue business, which I appreciate. But I do like the fact of joking around with how awkward sometimes these Zoom meetings can be and different electronic meetings can be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all learned, many valuable lessons over the course of this pandemic in terms of, new ways to actually get things done, things that you might not have even contemplated in the past. But all of a sudden they became a necessity. And one of the things that I will share too, relative to the temporary law versus the executive order. And as you know, the initial thrust was to have an executive order signed by the governor, but for any number of reasons, including, I believe, the lack of ability to override certain statutory provisions, we needed to shift gears and have a piece of legislation passed. And I've understood from any number of attorneys, after the fact, that ended up being one of the more beneficial things that we did, because all of the documents that are executed and have been executed in this fashion, there's a little bit more assurance that they're going to, stand up and be trusted and relied on and not questioned or anything, because they are steeped in statutory authority rather than in executive order. And so it kind of tended to work out, I think, for the best to end up having a statute on the books that lawmakers and practicing attorneys and everybody else could rely on then and in the future.
Let me ask you, if there's a document that is the removal of title for a manufactured home with the DMV, what do you think the over under is if I were to have that electronically notarized and I mail it into the DMV? Do you think I get a letter back with scathing remarks to me of how dare I, or do you think it gets accepted? What do you think the shot would be? Depending on the person who gets the letter, right? That's what we're talking about right now. But what do you think?
Well, I would just simply suggest contacting the good people at the DMV and pose
who are great people,
question.
by the way. They're great.
Absolutely.
They're some of my friends over there because I need them. Not only that, but they're super nice. And the people they have to deal with, oh Lord, they're on my prayer list. I'm going to be honest with you, Ozie. They're definitely on my prayer list. So where do you think we go from here, Ozie? What's the next steps? Give me what do you want to see? What is Ozie Stallworth, the godfather of e-Notary, want to see in the future? What do you want to see?
That's a pretty weighty title there. For electronic notarization and all of the electronic tools that we have brought to the fore, electronic signatures, electronic notarization, electronic recording. What we have been on a campaign to do over the past decade is to bring awareness to everybody who is doing business in the state of North Carolina to these new tools. It's been Secretary Marshall's vision and goal to ensure that North Carolinians enjoy a competitive advantage in this global marketplace. And there's a strong belief that having these advanced tools position us well to be able to provide that competitive advantage. And so right now, we have been saying for any number of years that we have entered into the paperless age. It's just about adoption at this point. So what precedes adoption is awareness. And so we've been on a mission through offering continuing legal education courses to the legal community for the past decade on all of these tools. We have, over the last 3 years, we have been working within the mortgage industry. We're about to host our 3rd annual electronic mortgage closing conference in Charlotte, North Carolina on November 9th and 10th.
And I missed my invite from you in my email, but I'm going to go ahead and write that date down right now so that way I can.
No, we're in the planning processes now. By the time that this airs, we should be in full swing with registration at the sosnc.gov. And what we are attempting to do with this, and again, this is our 3rd annual electronic mortgage closing conference. We'll have attorneys, lenders, notaries, realtors gathered together to explore and to continue to press forward the ideas and concepts of how we make electronic mortgage closing something that is the mainstream of North Carolina. We're going to be joined by the likes from officials from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, MERS, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, State Employees Credit Union, True Liant Federal Credit Union. We have an advisory board, an electronic mortgage closing advisory board that is working with us to continue to explore ways and opportunities to, now that we know that electronic mortgages are viable, to again bring it into the mainstream. And so the hope for electronic notarization is and again, all these other tools, is that everybody, again, who's doing business in North Carolina understands that these tools are available and that they will look to see whether or not there are benefits for them to begin utilizing them. One of the questions that oftentimes will be asked, specifically with the electronic notarization, I'll just talk specifically about what we currently have in the way of permanent legislation as of today, is that if you still have to be in person with an electronic notarization, what's the benefit of that? Why not just do it in paper? Well, one of the primary benefits is not only the speed of execution and the efficiency and the security, but when you eliminate the paper from the process, you're able to close a transaction a whole lot faster. You don't have to put something in an envelope, stick it in the mail, have it be delivered 2, 3, 4, 5 days later and sit on somebody else's desk and then it's open. With the click of a button, that paperwork is there, and now you can go ahead and close the deal. Funds are released faster. Keys are in the homeowner's hand.
Oh, now you're talking my language, Ozzie. Keys are the hottest topic at the table, man. Forget the mortgage payment. Where's my keys at? That's what people want.
There you go. And so electronic notarization brings that into view and makes things a reality. So we're just hopeful that we'll continue to expand across all industries. And that's the other important thing. We talked a little bit about this in the context of mortgages, right? Because that's, it's a big and hot topic right now. But literally any industry that relies on documents that need to be notarized can take full advantage of, electronic notarizations. Now, one things again that accompanies that is the use of electronic signatures, right? So you can't have an electronic notarization without an electronic signature. So, as people begin to see the benefit of migrating from a paperless process to an electronic process, it makes more and more sense for an electronic notarization. And there is no industry that is not going to be able to benefit directly from that.
Well, the other big piece too is counter to fraud, the reduction in errors. When it is from a planning perspective on the platform, setting up the document, and someone is setting where the signatures go, right? You reduce the number of errors, because I can't tell you, unfortunately, how many times I just get to chit-chatting in a room with somebody, Ozzie, and then all of a sudden page 7 out of 14 on that deed of trust, I accidentally forgot the initials at the bottom right corner. And I could make the argument to the cows come home to the mortgage closer that by law, we don't need those initials in the bottom right corner. The document is just enforceable by law with or without those initials. They don't care from a internal policy perspective. Those initials have to be there. So the reduction in error is also a huge point. I would encourage the businesses and companies that are teetering on this. You will have a better streamlined process internally and less errors to deal with post-transaction if you would support electronic signatures and electronic notaries.
Justin, I could not have said it better myself. I'm just, really thrilled to be able to speak with you about this, because you're speaking about this through the lens of actual usage. You've experienced this. And so when you have a practitioner who can speak to the realities of the benefits rather than some bureaucrat or somebody else who might be seen as hawking a process or, God forbid, a solution. Of course, that's not us. It makes a difference. So we need more and more practitioners like yourself who are actually on the front lines, who've had the experience and the benefit of utilizing these tools, because there are significant benefits that are meaningful. And if you look at processes over time, every time a document is rejected because, say, one of those initials is not there, that's time and that's money, and that's one more thing that is delaying you from getting to the next closing or to the next opportunity to better serve your clients. And so all of that is meaningful, and there are really tangible, observable, and quantifiable uh, things that you can look at to say, this process is so much better because of what it eliminates. The trailing documents, those go away.
Please, Ozie, make them go away. Make them.
Well, E is for you. E is for everybody. And so in just the tremendous benefits, time savings, lack of having to continue to, produce information, in terms of data entry, right? Because once it's in the system, and if that information can just kind of flow from one transaction or process to the other, less errors, less time. You don't have to worry about things that are missing, that are not there, that are incorrect.
They're uniform documents, Ozie. They're uniform documents. They can set up the system to just change the borrower's name, right? And let's even do the location of the notary acknowledgement where it's occurring, right? That's an easy coding concept for these companies that spend millions of dollars a year on their systems, and to reduce the error, reduce their cost. I mean, it's almost weird that they wouldn't want to do it, if I can be honest with you. And I'm sure there's some politics to it, but which isn't my realm. I'll leave that to you. But I'm sure that that's part of it. I want to go back real quick to the annual conference, because I think that's important, right? Because people always are looking for ways to get involved, right? People always are looking for ways. Oh, I don't feel like I'm being heard, right? But you're mentioning a platform, in essence, for people to come and to, if not be able to speak, at least be able to learn, right? And I think that education and knowledge is a chain breaker, in my opinion. So I got a little nerdy going on, because I got a little tingle on the back of my neck. You dropped the name MERS so nonchalantly that for most people, they have no idea who MERS is. So for you to be recognizing the importance to having servicing agencies a part of this means you know what you're doing, sir. So I appreciate that, and I applaud you for that. You dropped Freddie Mac like it was nothing, and Fannie Mae, which, you want to talk about 2008. Let's just ask them, hey, how you feeling, right? We can ask them about that. And then you bring up State Employees Credit Union, True and Federal Credit Union. You got your work for it. You got some heavy hitters right there that are going to be at this conference. You're talking about the state of North Carolina as a whole could be on its own way, and hey, call us if you need anything. Is that basically the thought process there, or what?
Well, again, our focus first and foremost is always what's in the best interest of North Carolinians. And Secretary Marshall has long been a pioneer and a leader in many things in North Carolina, but particularly in regards to electronic processes and notary. And all of this kind of lends itself to the electronic mortgage closing environment that we find ourselves ready to be in today. And so having that as an impetus to make sure that North Carolina, and let me take a step back too and share with you, as you know, as a practicing attorney in this industry, in North Carolina is a little bit unique in terms of how we handle our, transactions, our real estate transactions. And we very much wanted and needed to position ourselves in such a fashion that when electronic mortgage closing actually came to fruition, we needed to make sure that it was going to be something that worked for North Carolina. And because of our uniqueness, we needed to make sure that we were on the forefront of trying to figure out what that would look like for us.
Yeah.
And because if it was dictated by other outside entities and forces, it might not go too well. Who knows what that would look like, right?
Yeah.
And so we started out this initiative several years ago. And again, at the top, before we started, we mentioned Matt Hunnable. He was, someone who I met with and helped to kind of get this off the ground here in North Carolina. But the whole idea was to make sure that, number one, electronic mortgage closing was viable, that we have the tools necessary in North Carolina to make this happen. And we, did our first electronic mortgage closing with North State Bank, and found out that yes, it could be. And then from that point on, it was like, okay, well, now we've got to continue to bring in all of the right players, both locally and nationally, to ensure that this is going to be something that was going to be not only viable, but sustainable and scalable. And we've been working very diligently in that regard ever since. And we think we are right on the cusp. And again, some things have been expedited due to the unfortunate circumstances of the pandemic. But we are essentially one major financial institution away from turning on the switch here that will change the mortgage industry in North Carolina and in the country forever. And that's just not a bunch of hyperbole. That's a real assessment, and it's coming. And just a quick glance around the industry with all of the individual companies that are merging together and purchasing and acquiring other entities, that they're building the infrastructure such that this is going to be a reality sooner rather than later. And it's important for us in North Carolina to be prepared and ready, and be at the forefront of that. And to the extent that we can show a little light to others and help the rest of the country along, we're all for that too.
Oh, we'll be humble about it, but that's okay. That's fine with me. That doesn't bother me either. You brought up Matt Hunneville, and is that video still on YouTube of that first e-closing? Is that on there? Because I watched it.
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Because at the end, you guys are all giddy. We're high-fiving, fireworks are going off in the background. It was like you guys won the Super Bowl in that thing, which I love. But what do you think we're missing right now? What are people not realizing? Obviously there's a benefit, right? But generally speaking, what are we missing right now?
When you ask that question, now I kind of have to take a little bit of a turn and talk about some terms that many of your viewers or listeners may not even be aware of, right? Within the mortgage industry, they're aggregators, they're servicers, they're sub-servicers, they're investors. And we just need more and more of those entities to come to the table. In other words, when we first launched and we did our first electronic mortgage closing with North State Bank, it was very frankly a struggle to find someone to invest in that note, someone to provide liquidity for that note. There just weren't very many entities out there that could provide competitive rates for an e-note, right? And so if the investor had a rate that was higher than what it would be for a regular paper mortgage, then
what's the point? Yeah,
what's the point, right? So we need to have more and more entities that are trading in e-notes.
Is North State Bank servicing that note, by the way? That was one of my questions. I didn't look into that aspect. Are they servicing? Did they portfolio that one?
No, they actually ended up selling it to, I think, Freddie Mac.
Really?
Yes.
That's impressive.
Yeah. And so, and again, from end to end, what we were trying to do at that initial launch was to see whether or not this was truly viable and scalable. Yeah. And it is. It's just that we need more players participating in the marketplace. And that is changing, over the past couple of years. I mean, The Federal Home Loan Bank, there are, I think, 11 Federal Home Loan Banks, and nearly at least 4 or 5 of them. And for our purposes, most importantly, the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta has just launched a pilot program where they're, accepting e-notes through this pilot program. Wow. And they provide liquidity for, the second largest mortgage or credit union in the country. And so all of that points to, really grand possibilities that are right here on the horizon.
I'm adding, and I'm taking some notes here while I talk to you. So I got a list of some other people, for not to give you more work on your plate, because I'm sure you got about 1,000 other things to do today, and I'm just wasting your time at this point. But the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, North Carolina Banking Commission, HUD, and Survey Solutions. What about those 4? Can we get those 4 at the table, and then that way we can just run this thing home? You think that's a possibility?
Absolutely. And we are engaged with the majority of those entities, and they're tracking what we're doing very closely, and have been participants at our meetings and at our conferences. And so everybody is in a different state of preparedness and looking to be able to move forward. The positive thing is that success begets success. And the more success we have with each and every electronic mortgage closing, with each and every new announcement of, financial institution beginning to accept, e-notes, with, the GSEs, Freddie and Fannie, continuing to provide a regulatory framework for, the acceptance of e-notes. All of it points in a very positive direction. And as I mentioned earlier, just in terms of locally, what we need is adoption. That's kind of the key word for electronic mortgage closings nationally. It's adoption. Yeah. And more and more, we're beginning to see things coming together, and organizations building out their operational infrastructure to be able to support fully end-to-end electronic mortgage closings. And that doesn't even include, is we had some conversation earlier, the concept of the hybrid electronic mortgage, where some documents are executed electronically and others are executed via pen and ink.
Yeah.
And that's also very important and a very viable step for many institutions to kind of get started along the path that way. So we're seeing significant activity on both ends. Now, here's the really awesome and fortunate thing. The technology has been around for a long time now, and there are no questions or concerns about the technology, right? The technology has been tried and true, and you have everything from e-vaults to electronic signature solutions to electronic notarization solutions to companies that have been doing electronic recording for many years. And so all of those technologies are out there, and they've been in place for many years now. So again, it just kind of comes down to adoption across the industry, and we have yet to have that real big first fish kind of drop into the hot grease, if you will, and really start cooking. But that's bound to happen, at some point in time. Fortunately for us in North Carolina, we made a determination that we weren't going to try to rely on just a big catch, because this is something that's for everybody. Yeah. And sometimes the smaller you are, the more nimble you are, and the more you can kind of jump in and take advantage. Before, some of who would be competitors would be able to do that. And I think North State Bank and True Lion Federal Credit Union are great examples of that, and they're reaping the benefits of electronic mortgage closings earlier than some of the other larger players here in the state.
Well, it's a game of numbers, and eventually the bigger players are going to get on board because they're going to realize maybe there is something to this. I know we've been focused over here, but we probably should take a look at that over there because something. Wow, let me look at that on the balance. You said that on the balance. Oh, well, you said that from a revenue. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, we might want to look at that, right? Like that. And sometimes the way of the world, sometimes it's the numbers that get it there. And that's okay. And you know what? In this case, we can utilize the numbers to our advantage to get it done. And I'm okay with that too. And I won't even blow some of my colleagues' minds who are already throwing the tomatoes at the screen every time I pop up and start talking about blockchain with them, right? Because then we're into a whole nother realm of protection and security in ways that can ensure that fraud is not occurring, whether we're talking about execution or servicing and transferring of rights of the notes and all these other kind of concepts that are really going to be the hinge points for those big players. But Mr. Ozie Stallworth, he is the e-Notarization Director of e-Notarization and Notary Enforcement with the North Carolina Secretary of State. Ozie, if somebody wants to get in touch with you or has questions, or where would you want to point them to so they can kind of get more info?
Certainly, you can reach me directly at Stallworth at sosnc.gov with any concerns or questions about notary or electronic notary, electronic commerce, for information related to the upcoming electronic mortgage closing conference that is going to be held in Charlotte on November 9th and 10th. You can find information at sosnc.gov.
And we're going to put that link too for the podcast too, Ozie. We're definitely going to put that link for the conference, no doubt about that. I'm not going to put your email on there, and that's to protect you, I promise, because I appreciate you giving that out. But you're a bold man for doing that because I'm sure you get enough haterade in there already. So I'll try to reduce that, at least from my end, so you can't blame me for it. But I appreciate your time, sir. I certainly hope we'll have a chance to speak again. I think we will, but I certainly hope we do. And I appreciate your time.
All right, no problem. Thank you so very much, Justin. I really appreciate spending this time with you.